Yes, what we were interested in here, I think, is the fact that the harpsichord has seemed to have, in recent years, a little more of an audience, a growing interest in early music in general, and especially, in this case, the harpsichord.
No question about that. The harpsichord and, as you say, early music in general has developed over the past 60 years especially to almost the forefront of, I can't say the forefront, but a very prominent part of the general musical scene. And whether one's interest is in early music, meaning medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, either classical or even early romantic, nonetheless, the harpsichord is very prominent because it has a long historical period itself. Consider the 15th century, the 16th century, the 17th century, and the 18th century. That's 4 centuries of music in which the harpsichord was one of the most important instruments. And compare that, for example, with the piano, where you have the late 18th century, the 19th century, and almost a whole century in the 20th century. So there's really an enormous period of time for the harpsichord and for the literature. And that's one of the things that makes it so fascinating.
Well, what do you think accounts for the interest in early music that people have and the interest people have in the harpsichord?
Well, I think there are many reasons for that. And one is that in the 19th century itself, especially the late 19th century, there developed a whole viewpoint of history, of medieval history, of early history, that manifested itself in a number of isms. And all of these, the development of archaeology, of musicology, anthropology, and so forth, set the framework, so to speak, for a new look at music, all music, not just early music, but music of all civilizations, of all cultures. So that this is part of the broadening of a world outlook on music. And I think that in the 20th century, there have been additional reasons. One is that music, serious music, has become increasingly obscure for many people. And so that there was a sort of a looking back at something that was more accessible. Right. However, that's just one of many. Those are just several of many reasons. I think that the real reason that early music has come to in its own in the past few decades is due to the influence of rock. I think that rock, with its emphasis on bright sound, on the electric guitar, well, the guitar in general, and even more so the electric guitar, and the synthesizer, and the way of singing and the manner of singing in rock music, in which
is non-operatic.
Yes, and the use of falsetto and so forth, the softer sound, the more controlled sound, and all of that sort of sets the stage for an interest in early music. I think that I can see, even among my students over the past few years, a progressive stage in which the piano seems to be almost lacking in any interest whatsoever right now among some students. And I think it's the nature of the sound. The piano with its sort of dark, very mellow, very almost covered sound, and as contrasted to the brightness of the harpsichord, makes the harpsichord more appealing to a lot of people than the piano. It's not as familiar as the piano, but once the ear has had a chance to sort of hear it and get used to it, then the reception is there and is strong.
Now, what effect does this unique sound of the harpsichord have on the music that's written for it?
Well, I think that's a big question. And the fact is, of course, early music, let's limit ourselves to Baroque music and early classical music, has been played on the piano for quite a while. And there's nothing really wrong with playing it on a piano. As a matter of fact, when one thinks of playing the same music on the harpsichord with all the problems of constant tuning, of the fact that you have to be in a small place with a relatively softer sound, and the many problems of regulation that are involved in the harpsichord, one wonders why bother? Why not just play it on the piano? But I think the results can be very satisfying. Once that initial, the mind has had the chance initially to get used to the different sound. It's a very bright sound. And especially if you're close to the instrument, if you get right up close to the instrument and you speak into it, you can hear an enormous reverberation of your sound, so that each tone as it's played has that reverberation and that richness of texture, which is not possible in a piano. But that's only very close. And it's not also just a richness of texture, but a richness of overtones that are just like an enormous panoply of sound, sort of reverberating back and forth and clashing, all of the high harmonics of the overtones clashing with each other. And that almost brittleness of sound with its richness is very fascinating for the ear, very rewarding for the ear to hear.
Right, and it doesn't exist as much on like the dampened strings of a piano,
No.
and you wouldn't be able to hear it there. Now, you mentioned earlier focusing on the Baroque. I think it would be safe to say that Bach is one of the one composer that gets the special attention from that.
Yeah. First of all, because he was such a great composer, but I think that there's hardly anyone who doesn't like the music of Bach. It seems to be universal, not just Americans or Westerners, but almost anywhere in the world, in any culture, Bach seems to immediately be accessible to people in listening. It's something that people like. Whether they totally comprehend everything in the structure or not, the sheer sound.
Well, he's so known for string music, and he's known for choral music, and and in your case, keyboard music. You play
the organ,
the organ as
no,
well as
for the organ. I think it's strange that even though Bach is most famous as an organist and a composer of organ music, there is more harpsichord music by Bach than organ music. And compared to the number of volumes in the complete work edition of Bach, the number of volumes of organ music, there is a larger, considerably larger number of keyboard, of harpsichord music. This aspect of Bach, of course, is now becoming more prominent with the development of the harpsichord. It has been in the last decade or so that we have, for the first time, had a recording of the complete harpsichord works of Bach, a monumental job, seemingly impossible for any one person until recent times. But it has been done not just once, but now several times. And many of the works by Bach, such as some of the preludes and fugues from the Well-Tempered Clavier, have always been known by not just musicians, but by the public. But many of the other works are now almost equally well known. If one is going to play the music, one almost has what might be called a moral obligation to perform it in a manner that is as close as possible to the way the composer would want it. And of course, this is a big topic, a big question. The composer might be satisfied with more than one way of hearing his music. And when you deal with music that is so great as the music of Bach, it will sound good no matter how you perform it. There is a person in the Midwest, I believe it's in Kansas City, who, for her life work, performs the music of Bach, almost exclusively Bach, on the vibraphone. And it sounds marvelous. But Bach also sounds good on the piano, as well as transcribed for a symphony or a concert band, or in any other possible arrangement on a synthesizer and so forth. But the greatest satisfaction comes, in my opinion, from hearing it on one of the original instruments with care about this general style of the music itself.
Right, so the answer, let's say, to why play it on the harpsichord would be to hear it as Bach would have heard it composing it, or,
Yes.
or how he would have arranged it.
And the very problems that are involved in performing on the harpsichord lead one into a greater understanding of the music. Playing the harpsichord is not like playing the piano, or the organ, or the clavichord, even though it's a keyboard instrument. And yes, there are lots of similarities. A keyboard is a keyboard. But the whole mechanism of the harpsichord is different. And that involves a lot of changes in technique. Well, it really is a totally different technique.
Well, could you explain it a little bit,
well,
how the string is?
First of all, comparing it to the piano, which is a little more in everybody's experience. The piano technique, one uses, well, the fact that you can get various gradations of sound from loud to soft means that you use many parts of your body. You use your wrist, you use your arms, you use your body to force to get loud sounds, all of which is anathema to harpsichord playing. And that is another problem with the public, because a pianist is fun to watch. A harpsichordist is not fun to watch. There's almost nothing happening. And the description of Bach himself playing the harpsichord, there was no motion whatsoever. No motion in the body, or the arms or the wrists, only the fingers. And there's a reason for this. The reason is that as soon as you start trying to apply weight or anything else, you violate a good sound on the instrument. That's why it is almost impossible for a pianist to play a harpsichord, at least without totally redoing the whole thought process. An organist faces an easier job, and so it's not uncommon for many organists to play the harpsichord, and that's been true since the beginning of the harpsichord. Whoever plays the organ plays the harpsichord, and it's also, even today, somewhat true. But first of all, the keys of the harpsichord are somewhat narrower, so that one must use great care in the fingers. If you don't, you'll get your finger caught in between two of the black notes. And all of this helps you to get caught. Doing this gives you an ugly sound because you hear mechanism. All you need to get a good sound is to get the note to pluck the string, and that's all. So that this is controlled by the fingers. Furthermore, the harpsichord, the poor harpsichordist has to be very careful in playing, careful in a way that's almost impossible for a pianist to comprehend. In playing the piano, you can touch notes, and they don't even sound unless you actually push them down. But on a harpsichord, accidentally touching a note makes a sound, not a small sound, a full, total sound, so that any little touching of a note accidentally will produce what obviously sounds like a mistake. That's why it's almost impossible to play a harpsichord recital without the audience hear, oh, I heard your wrong notes. Even if the finger doesn't play a wrong note, somehow a note is touched somewhere. So the saying is that if it takes 1 month to learn a piece on the piano, it takes 2 months to learn the same piece on the organ, 4 months to be able to play the piece on the harpsichord, but 8 months to be able to play it on a clavichord. So difficult is the sound of a clavichord, but that's another topic altogether. But getting into the style of the harpsichord without the possibility for loud and soft, that means all of your expression is through legato, the various possibilities of legato, non legato, and in phrasing. You know what I mean by legato, non legato. Legato means connecting one note to the next note. And that can be done with an over legato, holding this note before you release that note.
Right.
All the way up to actually detaching the notes, and then finally up to staccato. So there are many possibilities. All of these little gradation of touch are what make harpsichord playing fascinating.
They'll affect how the different melodies will come through different points.
And since you can't phrase with your arm, you have to phrase with your sense of touch and your sense of connecting.
Okay, well, I think I'm tempted to ask what other composers would be known to people who are interested in the harpsichord, but perhaps I should ask first which pieces by Bach are known in the harpsichord, are interesting, that could show, give people an idea about.
That's two questions. The first question, either one we could go on and on about, but the first question, just a few comments. There are some great composers like Handel and like Scarlatti, Domenico Scarlatti, and like dozens of others, the whole myriad of French composers. myriad of Italian composers, English composers, German composers, Austrian. However, one of the most fascinating aspects of playing the harpsichord is simply discovery of great music that's not all that well known. And this has been the fascinating voyage of discovery for our present time. It has only been within the past 10, 15 years, especially the past decade, that critical modern edition of French music, of the broad spectrum of French Baroque clavecin, harpsichord music, has become available. And that has opened up a whole new world. Some music, like Bach, sounds good on a piano as well as a harpsichord. But some music does not. And the French music of the French clavecinistes, the Couperin, the great Couperin, François Couperin, does not sound like much of anything on piano. A whole world of music, such as the Elizabethan virginal school in the late 16th, early 17th century, doesn't sound very interesting at all on piano. It has to have the flavor, the sound of the harpsichord to bring it to life.